Although Pedro Alves was only 35 years old, he was a person of strong principles. He was the proud owner of a series of gas stations spread across North State. These gas stations were a reliable and substantial source of income for Pedro. Everything seemed perfect except for a persistent problem at one particular station. Pedro was perplexed by the issue plaguing that specific location. He made it a point to pay his staff well and on time, and he was flexible with them according to their needs. But for some inexplicable reason, that gas station was the target of negative reviews and frequently suffered thefts. Thieves focused on stealing fuel, of course, but also goods from the store. Pedro tried reviewing the security footage, but the theft was extremely subtle, or the problem lay elsewhere. Additionally, it was difficult to determine if the employees were involved, as there was no suspicious behavior on their part. Despite being concerned, Pedro was cautious about accusing his employees without concrete evidence. Despite the unpleasant circumstances, he tried to remain composed. One weekend, Pedro and his old friend Tiago went to a basketball game. Pedro enjoyed mixing business with pleasure, often combining formal meetings with leisure activities. Tiago had been Pedro's business rival before Pedro ventured into the gas station business. He operated a tire shop, and Tiago owned competing tire shops on the same road. Initially, they shared a strong friendship, but as more customers flocked to Pedro's shop, Tiago launched an aggressive campaign to outdo his competition. Their friendship quickly turned into rivalry, leading to a breakdown in communication between them. However, at some point, Pedro had an epiphany. He realized he was losing sight of his values amid the competition. He didn't want to succeed at the expense of his old friend. In a stroke of generosity, he proposed a change in his marketing strategy. Pedro decided to prioritize integrity and recognize that there was enough business for everyone. He wanted to move away from negative comparisons with Tiago's shop and focus on his own merits. Pedro's new marketing communication emphasized the products they offered to meet customers' needs and facilitate their journey into the future. They highlighted their excellent customer service offered at competitive prices. Without undermining each other, Pedro's business relationship with Tiago transformed into a solid friendship. In fact, it was Tiago who first suggested that Pedro enter the gas station business. After the basketball game, they visited a quiet cafe to discuss various matters, including the frequent thefts at one of Pedro's gas stations. After reflecting on the matter, Tiago proposed a simple solution. "Why don't you bring in employees from your other branches?" suggested Tiago. Pedro was initially perplexed. "What do you mean?" Tiago clarified, "You have employees who are doing well, right? And managers who are running those branches successfully, don't you?" "Okay," Pedro responded, beginning to understand. "You should bring Luis because he knows what to do and how to run things efficiently. See if anything changes." "But wouldn't that put the other branches at risk, with their managers leaving?" Pedro questioned. Tiago acknowledged his concerns but countered, "Yes, I understand your concern. However, I see two advantages here. First, you're trying to solve an existing problem. Second, you're giving other employees a chance to prove their managerial skills." Convinced by Tiago's advice, Pedro selected some high-performing employees and a manager from his other branches and transferred them to the problematic station. Although some declined the offer, the truly loyal ones accepted without hesitation. To Pedro's amazement, the problem with the troublesome gas station was quickly resolved. Positive reviews began to pour in, and order was restored. The gas station started operating efficiently, and profits increased. Although thefts weren't completely eliminated, they became considerably less frequent. However, new problems arose among the transferred employees. A gas attendant named Renat, after working at the new station for a few months, expressed a desire to return to his old branch or even quit altogether. Two of his colleagues also chose to resign. Intrigued by the situation, Pedro decided to investigate personally. He drove to the gas station and invited Renat to the back room for a chat. "Why do you want to go back to your old branch?" "I'm paying you more here," Pedro asked. Renat waved his hand dismissively. "I appreciate the raise, sir, but no amount of money can compensate for the stress. I'm exhausted from the constant criticism, whether it's about my appearance, customer service, or even how I operate the pump. It never stops. If it were just work-related, I could endure it, but she started commenting on my personal life too. The other day, my wife came by, and I stepped away to talk to her. I was told to handle family matters after work. No, sir. I appreciate everything, but I simply can't work with these people. Please let me return or let me go. I'll find something else." Pedro sighed heavily. He understood where Renat was coming from. The problem seemed to be with the manager. She was an efficient worker, thorough and meticulous in her management style, but she was apparently causing distress among the staff. However, Rebecca was also a major source of gossip and discord in the workplace. While she excelled in her duties, she fell short in personal interactions and leadership qualities. Pedro was at a loss as to how to handle the situation. He planned to have a friendly conversation with Rebecca about it, though the idea made him smile. Rebecca was an older woman known for her strong personality. Renat, the gas attendant, left the room in frustration, even quitting his job at the station. Now Pedro had another problem to deal with. He needed to find a replacement, at least temporarily, until he could hire a long-term employee. As he left, he noticed a young woman nearby. Her clothes were worn on her thin body, suggesting she was going through tough times. It was clear to him that she was facing a difficult phase. She was standing near the gas station, lost in thought, with no apparent intention of driving or buying anything from the store. Suddenly, a bold idea crossed Pedro's mind. He approached the young woman and asked, "Excuse me, do you need anything?" Startled, she looked up and smiled. "Sorry, I was just wondering if there was any work around here." "Really? That's fantastic. What kind of work are you looking for?" "Anything, honestly. I'm a quick learner and willing to take on any job." Pedro considered her for a moment. "Do you have any documents?" Yes, just a visa." "I don't have it with me right now." "That's okay, I understand," Pedro interrupted, anticipating that she might not have the documents. "Come with me." He led her back to the building, a feeling of excitement coursing through his veins. The young woman followed him to the office, where he asked her to wait at the door. He entered Rebecca's office with all eyes on him. "Good afternoon, Rebecca," he greeted. In the middle of a break, she choked a little on her drink and stood up. "Oh, Mr. Alves, sorry about that. Please, come in." Rebecca was a curvy woman who had tried and failed at various diets and exercise routines, always seeming to gain more weight than she lost. For some reason, Pedro always associated fuller figures with kindness, but Rebecca was an exception to his theory. The more weight she gained, the more irritable she seemed to become. Some speculated that her permanent single status and dedication to her work were factors in her unhappiness. When asked why she never married, she simply replied that it was hard to find someone who could handle her. "Ma'am, The rumors about the gas station are my concern. I'm here to deal with the fact that another gas attendant has quit." Rebecca looked visibly surprised. Who knows what ghosts are in their heads? Maybe they've breathed. Pedro ignored her response and replied, knowing she was essential to the station's operations. Firing her wasn't an option. "Ma'am, Rebecca, I don't intend to investigate this issue further today, but there's a new recruit waiting outside. If she also quits within a month, I'll have to investigate further." "A girl? We need a strong employee to fuel the cars, not a girl," Rebecca retorted. Pedro's voice grew serious. "I think you're overstepping your bounds, ma'am Rebecca." Rebecca bit her lip, unaccustomed to being put in her place. In her mind, her hard work and dedication were the backbone of the station's success. If it weren't for her, the business would have faltered long ago. Pedro was a wise leader, allowing his employees autonomy. While finding replacements wasn't difficult, he valued maintaining a harmonious work environment. The new recruit, Mariana, quickly learned her responsibilities. She took on her duties within an hour and wasted no time getting to work. Before Pedro left, she had already organized the recycling bins around the station. Before leaving, Pedro called Mariana aside. "Please take down my number and send me a message with your clothing and shoe sizes. I'll arrange a uniform for you. And remember, if the manager gives you any trouble, don't hesitate to call me." Mariana smiled appreciatively. "Thank you very much. I can handle it. I've dealt with things like this before." Pedro was surprised by the confidence of the new employee. Mariana seemed more capable than her appearance suggested. In the following 3 weeks, Pedro was too busy to visit the branch. He was worried, but Rebecca's brief and positive reports reassured him that everything was going well. When he found a free moment, he decided to stop by unannounced, parking a short distance away and opting to observe from his car before making his presence known. A car stopped at the gas station, and Mariana quickly approached. She looked transformed, the uniform fit her well, accentuating her figure. She no longer displayed the worn-out look of someone struggling. Mariana was smiling, showing off her bright, white teeth. Pedro got out of the car and walked towards her, approaching from behind. "Hello, Mariana." Surprised, she turned around and recognized him. She straightened up and took a step forward. "Hello, Mr. Alves," she responded cheerfully. "How are things? Is Rebecca treating everyone well?" He gave her a warm smile. "Absolutely, she's a lovely lady." Pedro was surprised. "You think Mrs. Rebecca is lovely?" "Yes, she's quite pleasant." He looked at Mariana with a skeptical expression, as if questioning her sanity. Keeping his eyes fixed on her, he slowly walked towards the office. Mariana was taken aback by his response, wondering if she had said something wrong. After he disappeared behind the office door, she returned to her tasks. In the office, Rebecca was scolding the attendants. "What the hell are you doing standing around while Mariana cleans the coffee machine?" Rebecca pointed to a spill of coffee. The attendants hung their heads, feeling guilty for letting a customer ask Mariana to clean up the mess. One of the attendants tried to speak, but Rebecca silenced him threateningly. "If this happens again, you'll be the one cleaning the entire area." At that moment, the attendants noticed Pedro's presence, and Rebecca turned around. Seeing Pedro, her irritated expression turned into a smile. "Mr. Alves, I was starting to think you'd forgotten about us. It's good to see you." Pedro was not only surprised but almost lost his balance. He had never seen Rebecca smile before. He also noticed she seemed a bit slimmer. "How are things, Mrs. Rebecca?" "Everything is wonderful, Mr. Alves. I can't express how grateful I am to Mariana." Pedro sat down in a chair in his office, completely confused. "I'm having a hard time believing this. Is it really me and Mrs. Rebecca?" Rebecca burst into laughter and replied, "Indeed, it's me, don't be alarmed, Mr. Alves." "You see," she paused to gather her thoughts before continuing, "Mariana and I had a big argument on the first day. I was so furious that I considered firing her and quitting myself." She seemed overly confident, but incredibly, we ended up talking all night. Her life story is full of hardships. I can't even describe her experiences in words, she could tell it better herself. We became great friends. She's smart, and I'd say she could replace anyone here, even you. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. She's well educated. What kind of education could she have? Pedro was stunned, but Rebecca just smiled. You'll find out soon. Pedro just shook his head. Okay, this sounds promising then. Rebecca brought the invitations for the company's New Year's party. Please find out who will need to be on duty. Of course, thank you, Mr. Alves. Pedro's company always hosted lavish corporate parties. He spared no expense, ensuring they were held in luxurious venues, including all employees. This year would be no different. As his company thrived, profits outpaced those of other companies with employee issues. Pedro was successful because he prioritized employee satisfaction. Mrs. Rebecca, would you mind joining me for a coffee? Pedro asked as he settled into his office. Sure, I'll be right back. A few moments later, a plate of cookies and a cup of coffee were placed in front of Pedro. He noticed that Rebecca also served herself a cup but didn't take any cookies. His eyebrows raised in surprise, causing Rebecca to laugh. Why are you looking at me like that, Mr. Alves? Yes, I'm on a diet again. Mariana suggested this new diet. I've never tried anything like it, so I'm sticking to it. And don't even mention my old love for sweets. Pedro left the gas station more perplexed than when he had arrived. He was particularly intrigued by Mariana. She was an enigma. When he hired her, he only intended for her to fill a temporary position until he could find a more reliable replacement. He had assumed that once she received her first paycheck, she would disappear, perhaps to buy alcohol. However, watching Mariana diligently fulfill her responsibilities made Pedro reconsider his previous assumptions. Well, whatever is going on, if things are going well, then that's excellent, he reassured himself. As the months passed, everything ran smoothly. Positive reviews for the gas station began to accumulate, and customer service even surpassed that of other successful branches. A recent wave of thefts abruptly ceased. Eventually, Pedro managed to catch the disgruntled former employees who were seeking revenge against manager Rebecca. Pedro thought that Mariana's arrival introduced a positive change to the station's environment and opted not to press charges. Instead, he quietly rehired the former employee at another branch. One day, Pedro received the guest list for the upcoming corporate party and noticed Mariana's name on the list, which made him pause. A person as unassuming and simple as her certainly wouldn't have a formal dress. Well, that's not really my concern, I suppose, he pondered silently. On the day of the party, guests began arriving early. While Pedro greeted some, others were unfamiliar faces. Recognizing the women proved to be a challenge, as they were all elegantly dressed for the occasion, making it difficult to identify them. Accustomed to their usual uniforms, Pedro found it hard to identify them as they were all elegantly dressed for the party. The restaurant was almost full. Pedro mingled with his known employees, engaging in casual conversations. As the formal ceremony approached, he found himself repeatedly glancing at the main entrance, anticipating Mariana's arrival. His curiosity oscillated between what she would wear and whether she would show up. Briefly, he turned to engage someone in conversation and was surprised by a beautiful voice from behind. "Good evening, Mr. Alves." His surprise left him momentarily speechless. "Hello." The woman before him was stunning. Her ethereal beauty seemed to transcend the realm of reality. Her hairstyle was sophisticated, her makeup impeccable, and her dress was exquisite. The dress seemed like it must have cost a fortune. Amused, he found himself equating the cost to that of a fuel truck. He doesn't recognize me. In fact, he didn't. He was certain he had never met this young woman before. She would be unforgettable. His gaze turned to Rebecca, the attendant in his peripheral vision, smiling from ear to ear. She whispered something, then after a moment, she waved at Pedro. Suddenly, he understood. "Mariana, is it really you? This can't be possible." The woman burst into laughter. "Well, as you can see, anything is possible." Pedro, stunned, couldn't reconcile the radiant version of Mariana before him with the version he remembered. But how? I mean, how do you explain this transformation? You said you needed a job and would take anything. I assumed your life had been so full of hardships that you would never manage to get back on your feet. Mariana began to laugh again. "Sorry for causing confusion. I would have shared my story, but you never asked. What would you have told me?" Pedro was curious now. "I'm listening." Mariana gave a gentle smile. She walked over to a table and sat down. Pedro followed and took the seat next to her. After a brief pause, Mariana began to speak. "Mr. Alves, thank you for employing me. I really appreciate your kindness." However, Pedro knew his decision to hire her wasn't purely out of kindness. At that time, he was desperately in need of an attendant for the gas station. "What's your story, Mariana? I'm having a hard time understanding how you transformed from the woman I knew to this dazzling figure in just 1 month." Mariana offered a faint smile. "Does the name Miguel Carvalho mean anything to you?" Pedro frowned, thinking before responding. "Miguel Carvalho, the billionaire owner of Carvalho's chain?" "Yes, I've heard of him. What does he have to do with this?" "Well, actually, I'm his daughter," Mariana replied. Pedro was momentarily stunned by the revelation. "You're Miguel Carvalho's daughter? The magnate's daughter?" "Indeed, I am," Mariana responded with a smile. "You see, about a year ago, my father and I had a disastrous argument. The details are long, and the cause quite silly. I was a wild, uninterested young woman, becoming the depraved person my father imagined I would be. I simply took too many things for granted. In the end, I defied my father, claiming that I could manage perfectly well without his support or money. However, I was excessively emotional at the time and didn't anticipate that my father would take my words seriously. He was indignant at my disobedience and immediately cut off all financial support. Within days, I was penniless. The friends who had previously been generous with me disappeared as soon as they realized I was broke. The first few months were unbearable. I felt like an addict going through withdrawal symptoms. All my usual recreational activities were suddenly out of reach. My father gave me a month to find a job and secure my own accommodation. He was firm in his decision. As Mariana shared her story, Pedro leaned back, astonished at the dramatic turn of events. The festive mood of the racetrack faded into the background as he listened to her story with full attention. His eyes were wide, eager for the next chapter. So that's how I found myself leaving my parents' luxurious house, completely clueless about what my next step would be. I had attended one of the most prestigious private schools, but my academic performance was just satisfactory enough to keep my father pleased. My first job led me to a fast food restaurant, where I was hired as a cleaner. It was then that I realized how difficult it can sometimes be to even get a simple job. It became clear to me that I had been seeing the world through rose-colored glasses and how people can sometimes be harsh to one another without any valid reason. Mariana had previously lived a life of constant partying, but when confronted with the realities of life, she discovered that people perceived her as arrogant and unpleasant. Talking about her privileged background seemed to worsen her image, despite her being just a regular girl with a kind heart and pleasant to those around her. During her job search, Mariana made another observation about people. She noticed that there were kind-hearted individuals who treated homeless people with dignity and compassion. She realized that sometimes pretending to be homeless could bring quicker results than being an ordinary person. It sometimes worked since people would quickly hand her a coin, eager to get rid of her as soon as possible. After receiving her first paycheck at the fast food restaurant, Mariana realized that growing up in a wealthy household had indeed been beneficial. She hadn't realized the wealth of knowledge she had acquired about customer service and the art of attracting repeat business by observing her father. When she started working at Pedro's gas station, it had already been a year since she left home. Mariana had challenged herself to start a hotel and restaurant business to prove to her father that she had evolved, and that was the exact reason she sought the job at Pedro's gas station. Mariana explained that her initial goal was to understand the flow of customers in the area. She confessed to Pedro that it would have been difficult to approach someone in his position directly with a business proposal. She wanted to contribute something to his business before making her request. After a reflective pause, Pedro finally broke the silence. "Wow, you've certainly piqued my interest. Now, what's your proposal?" Mariana's response was straightforward. "It's actually quite simple. The gas station is strategically located near a busy highway, at a point where many travelers usually stop for a break. I propose we open a small hotel and restaurant here." Upon hearing Mariana's proposal, Pedro examined her carefully. Mariana realized she had forgotten to apologize for her initial inadequate appearance. "By the way, I apologize for the impression I made when we first met. If you're open to my proposal, I believe we can quickly expand your business," Mariana admitted sincerely. Pedro was surprised. "Well, that's quite a revelation about you," he acknowledged, shaking her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Alves," she responded. Pedro was still curious about something else. "But one more question, Mariana, how did you manage to befriend Rebecca? She's known to be a difficult person to deal with." "Well," Mariana began, "I noticed that everyone sees Rebecca as perpetually irritable and impossible to communicate with. That perception became her reputation, and people stopped trying to talk to her. I simply interacted with her, listened to her, and she turned out to be an intriguing person. We talked frequently, and guess what? Now she's even dating someone." As the evening progressed, Pedro found himself instinctively drawn to Mariana, as if wanting to protect her from others. He couldn't understand why he felt such a strong need to protect her. He had told her that they would have plenty of time to discuss business matters later. At that moment, they were just there to enjoy the party. As the night went on, he found himself looking at her more frequently, and he began to realize that it was becoming increasingly difficult to stay away from her. The sun was beginning to cast a golden glow on the horizon when Pedro, who was usually accustomed to waking up late, had a clear destination: the gas station. The events of the previous night were still fresh in his mind. Mariana's revelation and her subsequent proposal had deeply affected him. It wasn't just the surprise that she was Miguel Carvalho's daughter or the impressive transformation she had undergone, it was her inventiveness, determination, and resilience that had left him deeply impressed. As he drove, he saw the city slowly coming to life. His routine usually consisted of meetings, phone calls, and a lot of paperwork. But that morning was different. He had a primary focus: Mariana. As he approached the gas station, he spotted Mariana in her usual spot. Despite the early hour, she was already working hard, and her professional demeanor had barely changed since the radiant, loving woman he had danced with at the party just a few hours before. The contrast puzzled him, but it only reinforced his admiration for her. As Pedro sat in his car, watching Mariana attentively serve customers, he felt a certainty settling in. He imagined her in an impeccable dress, occupying a leadership role, guiding the course of their joint venture. His decision was made. Mariana had proven that she was not only capable of overcoming her personal obstacles but also could significantly contribute to his business by offering fresh perspectives and ideas. Working alongside Mariana ended up being a rewarding experience for Pedro. His motivations went beyond financial gain, something that represented a refreshing departure from what Pedro was accustomed to in the business world. Having been exposed to immense wealth from a young age, Mariana had a different perspective from the norm. Financial success was not her only goal. She was passionately focused on creating and sustaining a prosperous hotel and restaurant business. She brought to the table contagious enthusiasm and unwavering commitment. Every decision she made, every idea she suggested, was driven by a genuine desire to create an establishment known for its quality and excellent customer service. Mr. Carvalho was a shrewd man. Although it might have seemed that he had let his daughter wander aimlessly, he was always watching. He knew where she was and what she was doing all the time but chose to keep his distance. Over the year, he observed his daughter's struggles and successes from afar, often feeling an overwhelming urge to break his resolution and rush in to offer comfort and support. But he saw that she was facing her own demons and going through truly challenging times, and he believed that intervening would rob her of the lessons she needed to learn. Just as he had applied his business knowledge to his personal situation, understanding the value of patience and letting things unfold naturally, when he learned of Mariana's ambitious plans to partner with Pedro and launch a hotel and restaurant, a wave of relief washed over him. He felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. His little girl was growing up, learning the hard lessons of life, and now she was on her way to becoming a successful entrepreneur. Mariana's transformation from a carefree party girl to a determined businesswoman filled Pedro's heart with pride and satisfaction. The struggle had been worth it. His daughter had finally found her way. Pedro found himself grappling with emotions that extended beyond the boundaries of a professional relationship. Unknown to Mariana, he harbored a growing affection for her, a secret love that stirred within him, not knowing how to express his feelings. He channeled those feelings into ensuring her well-being and protection, and his attention often bordered on overprotectiveness, catching Mariana by surprise more than once. Mariana, for her part, tried to maintain an impression of neutrality, as someone unaffected by the underlying romantic currents, but she couldn't ignore the signs. Pedro's constant attention and care suggested that he was far from indifferent to her, which stirred feelings of uncertainty within her, blurring the clear boundaries of their professional relationship. In just 6 months, the charming hotel and restaurant were ready and truly built for their grand opening. The date for the grand opening was set, and anticipation hung in the air. One night, a few days before the big event, Mariana and Pedro found themselves sharing a moment of tranquility in the new restaurant, enjoying a coffee from the newly installed machine. "Better than many cafes out there," Pedro commented, as the high-quality Italian coffee machines were a personal choice of Mariana. Their conversation seamlessly flowed from one topic to another, a fluid exchange of ideas about upcoming tasks and general operational processes. However, Mariana seemed a bit restless, as if struggling to express something. When Pedro's train of thought finally ran out, Mariana met his gaze with a serious, intense expression. "Is something wrong?" Pedro asked, confused by her behavior. "You're terrible at hiding your feelings," she stated bluntly. "Pardon?" Mariana sighed deeply, rolling her eyes. Then she reached out and lightly touched Pedro's hand. He gave a slight jump, surprised by her action. Mariana's smile reassured him as she finally confessed, "Aren't you going to ask me out soon?" That night marked a new chapter in Mariana and Pedro's relationship, taking them from a professional partnership to a romantic involvement. Pedro found the change challenging at first, struggling to reconcile the image of his business partner with that of his girlfriend. No matter what she said, he found himself lost in her words, simply observing in awe, struggling to stay focused during this transition. Mariana maintained a professional demeanor during work hours, showing her softer side outside of work. 2 days before the grand opening, Mariana decided to invite her parents. Mr. Carvalho, observing his daughter arrive in her modest car, realized that his beloved daughter had indeed changed. Despite being able to afford a more luxurious vehicle, she had chosen a mid-range car. "Dad," Mariana entered the house with a welcoming smile on her face. Mr. Carvalho, who was in the living room engrossed in his newspaper, looked up to see his daughter. "Hey, Dad, it's been a while. How have you been?" Mr. Carvalho stood up, his face lighting up with a warm smile. He approached Mariana and hugged her sincerely. After a moment of silence, he finally spoke, his voice slightly trembling. "I'm sorry, my dear." Mariana looked at her father, not fully understanding what he was apologizing for. "I let you go through all those struggles. It was never my intention for you to go through it all alone. But I also knew you needed to grow on your own. I hope you can forgive me for that." Mariana's eyes welled up with tears, but she held them back, putting on a comforting smile. "Dad, I'm grateful. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be who I am today." Mrs. Carvalho entered the living room, and upon seeing her daughter and husband in an emotional embrace, she joined them. The family stood together, holding each other for a long moment, overwhelmed with emotion. It was a powerful testament to how much each member of the family had endured and how far they had come, together and apart. When Pedro and Mariana arrived at the gas station the next morning, there was a silent understanding between them. Things had changed. Mariana hadn't realized the depth of her father's care until he expressed it the night before. A profound change had occurred in her. When she first arrived at the gas station, Pedro had been a source of comfort, a quiet mentor who showed her how to see the world differently. As their relationship evolved from a professional one to a more personal connection, Mariana had begun to view Pedro in a new light. With her father's blessing and renewed confidence, she felt ready to take their relationship to the next level, no longer just as business partners but as a couple. On the grand opening day, the hotel and restaurant were decorated with lights, fresh flowers, and the aroma of exquisite dishes filled the air. The guests began arriving, and the event quickly became a success. Mr. Carvalho couldn't contain his pride as he mingled with the guests, sharing stories of his daughter's incredible journey. Mrs. Carvalho, on the other hand, observed everything with a mixture of pride and nostalgia, recognizing how much her daughter had grown. The opening ceremony went off without a hitch, and as the evening unfolded, the atmosphere turned into a celebration of triumph and new beginnings. However, for Mariana and Pedro, that night held a deeper meaning. As they stood together on the balcony, overlooking the bustling event, Pedro took her hand and squeezed it gently. "We did it," he whispered. Mariana turned to look at him, a mixture of pride and affection in her eyes. "Yes, we did." But their story wasn't just about business success. It was also about love. Their relationship had evolved from partners to friends to something much more profound. And as they stood together, hand in hand, they knew that whatever challenges came their way, they would face them together. The story of Mariana and Pedro is one of transformation, growth, and love. It's a testament to how life's challenges can shape us and how, with the right person by our side, we can overcome anything. Their journey wasn't easy, but it was worth every step. And as they looked out at their successful business venture, they knew that this was just the beginning of their story together.